Welcome to the She Did It Her Way podcast, where it's all about making the ultimate leap from your 9 to 5 and building a business and life you love, all while doing it your way. I'm your host, Amanda Boleyn. Let's get started. All right, my fabulous She Did It Her Way listeners, if you guys are checking this out, listening to it on the podcast, or maybe you're checking it out on YouTube, welcome. I am so excited to be sitting down with someone who, a friend acquaintance who we were saying the last time we saw each other in person was in West Des Moines, Iowa years ago, which we'll get into. But anyway, I'm excited to bring Jenny Singh on the podcast today. I just think that she has a really unique, incredible journey and story about making her ultimate leap and quitting her 9 to 5 when she realized that agency life was not what she wanted for herself, and also to share her expertise on Facebook ads and Instagram ads because they're owned by the same company. So without further ado, Jenny, welcome to She Did It Her Way.
Hey, I am so excited to be here. It's so funny. It's like full circle, right? As you said. So yeah, I'm so excited to begin.
Well, because we were saying it was years ago in West Des Moines, Iowa, in that pit on a Panera on is it Hayes Mills Road or something?
Yeah. It's so funny because I feel like we met each other way back in the day, meaning I don't know, 11, 12, 2013 with Go Blog Social, right? Like that way back in the day, you had friends there and mutual friends, and I spoke at one, and I feel like, I don't know, we just crossed paths.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Go Blog Social was that was back in 2011, 2012. Catherine from Kansas City, Kat Snellen, was the main organizer. And I forget how I got connected with her, but that is so funny. Yes, that is so over a decade.
That's how it crossed. Yes.
Wow. Yeah. So anyway, tell us in your own words what it is that you do. And then per usual, I like to kind of go back and walk us through. I know you had shared with me in the preliminary survey that, you quit your job 2 weeks before you got married. So I'm super curious about that and want to unpack that journey. So I'll stop talking. You take it over.
Yeah. So today what our business looks like is it's multi-pronged in that we started more on the agency done for you services side. So, and we still have that and love that prong of our business. So we run full funnel Facebook and Instagram ads, predominantly right now in the coaching courses, digital products space. So we love that vertical. So we have done for you clients where we do their full ad management, which is really fun. And then in the last 18 months, we actually launched our own courses and masterminds and then just digital products too, to really serve everyone and the gaps that we were seeing it really. So the people that weren't ready to hand off fully functional ads and really scale businesses, we're hyper focused on also serving now entrepreneurs that want to get started in ads or either get started or are also, hey, maybe things are happening but not going as fast as you want. So we're kind of working on all phases so that ultimately you can hire it out fully and just say, hey, things are working now, pour gas on the fire is what I like to say. So yeah.
Oh, that's so exciting. Okay. And we'll dive into your journey as a business owner and all of that good stuff. But take us back to the moment when you're like, this agency life is just not what I want.
Yeah.
in corporate.
Yes. So it's kind of a funny story. The way I put it is I went to college for advertising and marketing, literally saw myself making Gatorade commercials one day. That's the vision I had, right? Of hey, I'm going to move, get to a really big agency. That's what I want to do all day, every day. The joke, this is going to age me, but I don't know if you ever saw this movie, What Women Want. It's I don't know, 2000 or something, right? It's super old. But Helen Hunt had this job where she made Nike commercials and did strategy. And I was like, that sounds like the cool, you can be an adult and do that. That was where it started. But flash forward, graduated from college, and literally I graduated on a Friday and started my first agency job that Monday. So 72 hours later, right?
Wow.
Which was perfect. And I really liked it. I've liked every job I had, right? But the trajectory of when I left college to when I started my own business was kind of one of those things where about every 18 months I would get pulled from an agency or a corporate job, and someone would say, hey, we want you to come over work here, which is a high compliment, right? Usually it comes
Mm,
with like a pay increase and you're also like, ooh, I'm special. Someone's pulling me, which is all true, right? Like you're doing good
yeah.
here. We want you to come over here. But the fourth time that happened, so it was every 18 months. So by the time I was 26, I'd had 4 jobs, continually like going up that corporate ladder or whatever you want to call it.
Mm,
And I kind of started to look at like, why does every 18 months it feel like I need a new challenge or I need to like go somewhere? And so I
mm,
started just reflecting of, is it really the jobs or is it just that like I kind of want to do things my own way and like I keep looking for like a challenge? Like I kind of got to a point where internally I felt like I kind of accomplished everything I could without butting against like either, hey, we can't do that, or like, hey, that's not the route we want to
you're
go,
like,
just
no, no,
all the
no.
barriers,
This is
right?
how we
Yeah.
do things. Don't go
Yes.
outside the box.
Yes. And so I think on job 4, it was just a culmination of that inner reflection and like I'd always in the back of my mind wanted to do my own thing anyways. And so I think
Mm,
it was just this tipping point of being like, I don't think I'm ever going to be able to fully call the shots in any like job, quote unquote. And so yeah, just kind of like I went cliff diving and went all in on owning your own business, right? Um,
yeah.
I think that's really it. Like I never say like I'm not anti-job or anti-corporate. I love it and I think it's meant for people. It's just one of those like inner reflections of realizing, hey, there's a pattern here and you
Mm.
ultimately want to do something anyways. So like, why not now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have some follow-up questions, but one comment before that. Interesting that you say 18 months because when I worked at Target right out of college, they always had their ETLs, the executive team leader. So basically you managed direct reports and like a certain area of the store, but they were really adamant about transitioning their ETLs every 18 months. So I'm
Interesting.
wondering if they like found there's this like underlying rhythm where people kind of like, and it kind of makes sense because you get into a job, you're really excited, you've got the motivation, it's expanding and pushing you enough that it kind of keeps the momentum. You're not drowning necessarily, but then you kind of lose that motivation, but now you're really in that growth. And then you probably hit a point of like, I got this, I'm bored. Like, how else do I
Yes.
grow? So yeah, that's interesting that you say 18 months because Target's really, especially if you're on a hypo track, they really want to switch you out. And again, I don't know what it's like now. I mean, this is 10 years ago when I worked
Totally.
there. But like if you're on hypo, here you are for 18 months. And then they have your next round of 18 months planned on based on your strengths and weaknesses and where you need to grow. So they're like super strategic. But anyway, back to your journey. So when you quit your job, did you make that internal what sort of things, and it's okay if you didn't do anything, I'm just curious about your journey. Did you what sort of like preparation,
Oh
conversations with your
gosh.
spouse? Was it when you quit, had you been thinking about making that leap 6 months prior, 3 months prior? How long were you meddling, or I don't know if meddling is the
No,
right word,
totally.
like
Like,
kind of going back
how
and
long was I
forth, having
plotting,
that
right?
conversation? Wait, how
Yeah.
long were you what?
How long was I plotting?
Yeah, how long
Yeah.
was your plot timeline?
So this is gonna be kind of a funny answer, at least to me. It's one I actually don't recommend to people, to be completely frank.
I
But
love how
I
we always recommend things, but we're like, but don't do it. This is
don't
what I
do
did, but
this.
don't do
Yes.
this.
Well, my big thing, I know you feel the same, is like entrepreneurship is such a reflection of self, right? And like I just feel like it's the ultimate like self-growth journey. Like if
Oh,
you're in it, right, you discover a lot about yourself.
all your skeletons are coming out, and you're like, ooh,
Yes.
I did
Yes.
this.
So what I know to be true about myself is I'm someone that responds really well to like no parachute. Like that's just who I
Yeah.
am. As stressful as it sounds, and like I'm just someone that responds to like, hey, there is no option B, or like don't
Mm,
let yourself out. I love just that because it makes me show up and like get stuff done really quickly. Like I just know that about myself. I respond that way. Not everyone does well in that situation. That's why I preface that with it had been an inkling in the back of my mind. So I had like side hustled, meaning taking on just like clients on the side, right? Like nighttime, weekend hours.
sure.
Probably for like 3 to 6 months, but not serious, right? Just kind of being like, do I like this? Kind of no true plan. Um, and it just kind of got to the point of, if anyone else like resonates with this, but I'm someone that has a big gut feeling. And honestly, the trajectory was I just woke up one day and looked at my husband and, or well, my fiance at the time, and
Mhm.
said, hey, I think I'm quitting today. Like that was it. Because it just putting in my 2 weeks. Meaning I'd been inkling around it, but no true like, hey, here's my business plan, here's anything. It was just like, I can't do this anymore because like the like growth inside of me and this gut that wants to go do something else is so strong that like it's honestly, I don't know, not necessarily making me sad, but making it so hard to get up every day and go do this thing when like the thing I really want to do is over here. And I feel like I'm
Mm,
just not, yeah, showing up as like the best version of myself anymore. So it was just a
yeah.
rip the band-aid off situation. Woke up that day, put in my like, well, I said like I'd give him a month, but it ended up just being 2 weeks and just went for it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we're gonna unpack that too. I wanna know,
Yeah.
I'm gonna say, Jenny, take us back to that first day you woke up and you were not at a corporate job. And but
Yeah.
first though, there are some things that I want to call out. One, I do agree with you. I think it's so important to know ourselves and what situation, if we do well when our back is up against the wall, or might we do well when we have something else, coming in and whatnot. And I'm risky, and I take calculated risks in some areas of my life, but in some I'm like, okay, no, I need to have that like solid consistency and then be able to
Totally.
play. But you did say that you had clients for 3 to 6 months prior to that, and I think that's so smart because it helps validate that. One, you landed a client. There's obviously, I mean, there is a need, right? But it demonstrates your ability to market your services and have conversations and land and service clients. And that provides so much. I do believe that. I think if someone's going to quit their job, it's how can we help validate what it is that you want to do and what you're doing, so that your brain can use that as evidence that there's more where that came from, so that it's not freaking out when it doesn't have that past evidence to lean on when you quit your job. So question, like, how did you find clients while you were working full time? And I didn't actually expect for the podcast to go here, but I'm curious, like, how did you manage your clients, your personal book of business while working full time? And was there any sort of, I shouldn't be doing this? Because I know sometimes people worry about their corporate job and working the business alongside of that.
Totally. That's a great question. I'll tackle number two. So, because I was conscious of that, because I feel like just as a good person, you go, hey, someone is paying me a salary, right, to do a job, and it could look like competition.
Mhm.
Those first clients, though, when I was first side hustling, were not like massive clients that like an agency would be like, these are the people we want as
Mm.
clients, right? So, like, as far as competitiveness, right, like we weren't on the same
You're like, we
playing
wouldn't
field in
even
the
take
first
them.
place. Yes. So that helped, and also just transparency, right? Like I did tell a supervisor like, hey, this is what I'm doing.
Mhm.
Which to be frank, I love side hustles and it helps you just grow as a person. So honestly, if you're not competing, quote unquote, it can actually help you grow and like serve like the day job clients better, right? In my opinion. So
So
I think
good.
just having that like conversation, being transparent about it, to be honest, in that realm, I wasn't fully like, hey, this is the business I want to go create yet. So like that exploratory phase for sure helped validate, is there
Mhm.
a need? Can I have sales conversations? Like you, I love sales. So like that was really fun. And I was like, oh, this comes way more naturally than I thought, right?
You're like, yeah, this is
Yeah.
fun.
This is super
It's
fun.
kind of like an experiment. You're like,
Yeah.
what are their true objections and how can I change the way that I say something so that I'm like hitting on their pain point? And
Totally, totally. And so yeah, as much as I make it sound like, hey, I just woke up and did it one day, there for sure was this ramp up period of like, do I like clients? Like, right? Like, it's just different when it's like your own thing. Like, is this business model that we're going to start? Is this the route I want to go? And I really loved it. I just loved being able to control everything, control the whole like direction, structure, do things my way. So that like 3 to 6 month ramp up period of just dabbling with no true like, hey, this is like the growth mindset. It's really just going, do I like this? Does it sound fun? And getting yes or no's along the way while being transparent at the day job. And then it just got to a point where I was like, and it's funny, right? I think any business can tell when you start to go, hey, I think they're liking what they're doing, right? And I feel like they can kind of start to tell, right? Not in a bad way, but it's just one of those things where it's like, oh, I actually love businesses. If you've ever listened to How I Built This, which I know you probably have, I know many people are have. There's
mhm.
one founder I love. He's the founder of Otterbox, and I cannot remember his name. He actually has a practice that I loved of he interviews his employees once a year and goes, is this what you want to be doing? Yes or no. If it's a no, like we'll help you get your next job, because he
Oh,
so cares about
amazing.
humans. And
Yeah.
like we want like people here that ultimately love what they're doing all day. And if not, there's no offense taken. It's like, we just like you as a human. How can we help you grow?
Wow, that's incredible.
I know. I heard that and I was like, that's amazing. And now with like our company, that's really like what I always want to have in the background, knowing I was once in that place of like, how can we just help you do whatever the heck you want here or there? You know what I mean? So sorry, tangents. I always just go like sideways when I'm
No,
talking
I mean, hello,
about.
welcome to the podcast. I'm sure my listeners know that sometimes I go on a tangent and I do my very best to land the plane and circle back as opposed to just
Yes,
never. But
going.
although one podcast, I was like, we're going to talk about X, Y, and Z. And then I did the interview. And then afterwards, I texted the guest and I go, we actually didn't talk about Z. And I'm like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, we got so into it that like we spent so much time, which it was, I was like, you'll just have to come back on the show. No, so that's amazing. And I think that runway and coming from a lens of, I think that's the other thing, right? Like where we operate from is, are we taking action from this has to work, gripping it, or are we taking action from a place of, you know what, I'm going to take consistent action. I'm going to have fun. I'm going to experiment. I want to see, do I actually like this? And the energy that we bring to the table is so different. Even if we're building and working on our side hustle, or if we're building our business and it's the full-time thing that we do, it makes all the difference. Okay, you quit your job and you woke up. Do you remember the day after you put in like, what did you do the day after you put in your 2
Oh
weeks?
gosh, this is
If
like,
you
I
remember that, I know
giggle
that
at
was like,
myself. Oh, I totally remember it because I put in my 2 weeks and I wrote this, like, I still have it. I love it. I think it's one of those things I'll have for my whole life. I wrote like a whole letter to myself the next day of like, this is like, I dated it. And I was just like, kind of one of those things of like, on the hard days, like come back to this thing. And I wrote out all the reasons I was doing it, like what it meant
oh,
to me. And I like giggle. I probably look at it once a year. It's in an old journal I keep. It was really that. It was just a really big grounding of like, hey, you're doing this for X, Y, and Z reasons. Like, keep coming back to this, because as an entrepreneur, I feel like the farther you get away from day one, sometimes you kind of on days that are just not like you're in your zone and in alignment, you can kind of get away from like, here's why we're doing the thing. Keep coming back to it. So
yep.
that's what that day was. It was really hard. It was really exciting. There's hard emotions too of like, am I letting people down for leaving this job, right? Am I also
Mm,
all of the egoic questions of what are people going to think, right? Just all of
yes.
these the things. Yeah, so there's the highs and lows that first day that just kind of dripped through the first couple weeks and months, right? But that was the first day, really just grounding in, why are you doing this? Why does it matter? Like, these are all the foundational beings, you know?
I love that ritual of doing that. And I think it's so important. And you were saying too, even as entrepreneurs, as you get more into it, it's always good to go back and to remind yourself all the time, why do we do what we do? Because it's easy to remind ourselves like why we do what we do when everything is calm. But it's when there's
Yes.
like this big SHIT storm, it's like everything's broken and no one wants to buy from me. And I probably should just close up shop right now. And we've destroyed our entire business in 30 seconds in our mind. And
Totally.
then versus it's okay, let me go back to the why. Why did I start? So that's an incredible, I love that ritual. I think anyone who is in the process of making their ultimate leap, like when you quit, taking a moment, take a beat and journal on that day and remind yourself why and always reflect on that. Heck, I think we should always do it anyway.
Do it
So
like monthly, right?
do it. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, that's what I find, that if I'm ever spinning out in my thoughts and I feel as if my world is closing in, going back to my why just reinforces and motivates and inspires me to keep going in the face of a quote unquote failure. So, okay, you quit when you were 26. We're probably about 7 years out. Take us through high level the phases of your business in terms of where you were when you started and kind of where you are now. And if you could kind of just chunk that for us.
1000%. So I think we're eclipsing our 5 years this spring. So like we're around 5 years in. And it's funny, I have these conversations with the entrepreneur friends all the time. I feel like there's something around year 3 that there's this like magical tipping point of like, you've been in it long enough and gone through the like what's worked, what's not, who's my person, like all of the grounding things that like if it feels, and no one, if you're listening to podcasts, you can't see this, but like years 0 through 2, I feel like you're kind of just like trucking along a
Mm,
little upward movement, and then all of a sudden it starts to go, right? There's upward movement around year 3. And so I feel like 0 for 2 for me were honestly, I think how fast you go through that phase is purely like a personal development thing of like, where are you at mentally? Which everyone's going to enter that race at a different starting point. And
uh-huh.
meaning I'm big on build a business that not necessarily is like your passion or like, because I actually, the farther I've gotten in entrepreneurship, I don't think it's a thing that's going to make me a human and like fulfill me in every capacity. If you asked me at 26, I would have answered that very differently.
Oh
And
yeah.
not like, right? So
It's
I,
supposed to be my everything and anything, and it's
yes,
supposed to fill every single cup. And it's like,
yes,
no, no, if that fulfills, you can't, if one thing fulfills every cup, might need a, or at least my
right,
personal experience, right?
yes,
I'm like,
yes.
I don't know. Cause my creative outlets, like I used to think the podcast and the business was my creative outlet. And sure, I still use some creativity there, but I have learned so much more that like more I've gotten that my creative outlets are really into cooking and home decor.
Totally.
And they're so separate from, not so separate, right? But like separate enough that when I'm working, I'm working. When I'm creative, I'm creative. So anyway, sorry,
Yes.
I didn't mean to see.
No, I
Sometimes they get
fully
it.
agree. I
Yeah.
feel like that just comes with growth and maturity, right? Like that's
Yeah.
where I'm like 0 to 2, you know none of that, or like you just don't have that experience yet to like know better.
Yeah.
So like I feel like 0 to 2 is just truly getting better at your actual like craft, meaning so at the core what we do is ads, right? But with that is marketing, sales, customer service,
Mm,
like the whole gamut of stuff that you probably are not like perfect at. You're not great at all of those things. So working through all of that, figuring out what do I like, what I don't like, what can I hand off, like what are the processes. I'm not a like who processes are not my jam.
oh,
That's something
love.
that like see, I'm more of like a visionary, like I like really high levels. So like I have team members now that are very process oriented because like that's a weaker spot for me or something that I just am not going to go all in on.
Mm,
So I feel like 0 to 2 is just learning all of that and having those conversations and just building like the foundations of your business, right?
yeah.
Um, and then 3 to 4 was really where everything started to take off, and that you started getting brand recognition. You started niching the heck down, which I know everyone says that, like riches are in the niches. But I also think there's a wading through on your part of going, who do I like to talk to? Who do I want to help? And within like the who, there's typically like buckets of humans within like a larger realm. So it's just wild the closer you get to yourself and getting really good at your craft, typically the smaller your niche gets in
Mm,
general.
yeah.
Um, so I think a lot of that, and then phase 5 was really starting to hire people and really start like the scaling side because I'm a big get foundations in place before you start to really scale because you don't want like the car breaking down when you're like flying on the highway.
Right. And, like
So
there's a time and a place for fast moving, breaking down, or at least it feels that way, right?
yes,
Between 0 to 2
yes,
years, it's throwing everything at the wall, what works, what doesn't, and kind of just building that track record of success of what you're saying. Like the funnel of who you work with and who you think you want to work with is so broad. And one of the things that I work with my students and clients with in Elevate University is like really understanding that we can only think so much about what we think we need to do. Then it's a matter of like, how can we move past perfectionism and just
totally.
build the habit and the muscle of taking action so that you build that trust with yourself to know that you can take action in the face of fear and know how to use like the tools in order to change the way you think about it. But um so 5 plus years, you said it's like when you tell us a little bit more about 5 plus years.
Oh yeah. So now
Yeah.
we're in this phase where it's funny. I feel like the foundations of like why we do what we do, how we do it is so there. Now we're at this phase of like, for lack of a better way of putting it, like locked and loaded of like we know who we can help and we're really good at it. So now we're just like, hey, come over here. And we're hyper focused on more traction because we believe so deeply in like the transformations that we can provide, especially in the space of yes, done for you clients, but also in what we do, Facebook and Instagram ads can like either terrorize people. They've heard awful stories about it. Like there's so many feelings about like the space I'm in that just resetting people's mindsets and like approaches and sharing like, hey, they can absolutely work and crush it and be like a massive tool in your toolbox as a business owner, but they might not have just found the right person or team or philosophy to do it yet. And like our entire like, I don't know, our vision for 2021 and 2022 is to really focus on helping as many business owners do that and do it
Mm.
healthfully and sustainably. And so year 5 is really us just, it's like owning that, I guess, and taking as much space as possible because we've seen the transformations we can help. And that honestly is like a little, it's egoic, but there's like a high that comes with seeing someone get results like that, right? That you're like,
Oh,
oh
for
my God, I want to help
sure.
as many people get this as possible now. So now I just don't shut up about it, right? I feel like when you're like in the building phase, you're like, does this work? Is anyone getting results? And then once you see it coming to life, you're just like, oh my gosh, I just want to like help people.
Yeah.
I actually feel like I love sales like you, and I actually feel like not talking about it is a disservice because there's someone out there that
Yes.
like we could help, right? So
Yep.
yeah, which 0 to 2, 0 to 3, I would not have been like talking about it all day, every day. And now I'm like, oh yeah, ask me about it, right? Just because it's an opportunity to help someone. So
Right.
yeah,
Oh, so good. And I took, if you're watching the YouTube video, you can see all the notes that I've taken. But a couple of things you mentioned, I'm not gonna get this word for word, but you touched on like slow growth or like growing slow. And I'd love for you to share kind of that journey. So I know Allie Bjork was on the podcast like a handful of weeks ago, and she had
yeah,
shared that I think it was 7 years before she even hit like a six-figure mark. And people will share all that. And one of my friends has a multi six-figure business. And in the beginning, it wasn't this like first year $150,000. No, it was like 40,000. Then it incrementally grew. So I would love for you to like you can share as much or as little as you want, but just speak on, the insights of growing slow and consistence and steadiness.
totally. That's a great point. So when I first started, so like you said at the beginning, I put my 2 weeks in and just looked at my fiance like, hey, I'm quitting my job today. We were 3 months out from getting married, and we just hadn't really talked about like any of that stuff. Like I told him, hey, like you're signing up for a ride, right? Is the way I always put it. Like it's just gonna be like I'm just gonna make stuff up as we go. That's just my personality. That's like the lifestyle I want. Um, so my first year, I was literally like, hey, I think a lot of people start this way. Hey, if I can make my old job salary within 6 months, like I'll feel good about myself because it's equal, right? Like I don't feel like
Yep.
I'm giving up anything. I feel like that's a lot of people's benchmarks, right? So that was it. Hit that the first year and I was like, cool, this is great, right? Like it's working is kind of the way I put it. Um, but then years like 1 and 2, we quickly hit multiple six figures just from like our service sides alone. Um, and it's funny, right? Because the reason I preach slow growth is because I just having the background I have, and plus my husband comes from like a controller financial like
Mm.
CPA background, so he's super grounded in like the finances of business. So it's great because I have a partner that is very like data and financially like grounded, which not that I'm not, but I love the sales marketing side of thing, like the
Hmm.
making sales. And he's like, cool, we have a sale. What's the numbers say, if that makes sense?
You're like, yeah, you made a sale, but how much did it cost you to make that sale?
What's the profit? Totally.
Yeah.
Like all of the
What's the
questions.
profit?
Yes. And so the reason, so we hit those goals really quickly. But I've always found, especially running people's ads and with our accelerator members, is I'm really big on looking at the data points and indicators in a business of like, hey, what is the actual like data telling you? And once you
Mm.
hit certain tipping points, then you can just go all in on it. Versus I personally, as much as like I sound like I love risk, I do. But like you said, smart, intelligent, like risk. So paying attention to
Mm.
indicators of like, is this going to work or not? And so then just really going for it. So after year 3, things really ramped up. And now we're just looking at like not necessarily how fast we can grow, because I'm actually a big proponent of build your business in a way that supports like your ultimate lifestyle.
Mm.
Like I will teach you to be rich. Ramit is a beautiful human. He preaches like, hey, you can have any kind of like life you want, but build like your businesses, your job, everything around it. And that's how really big I am.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, I don't know if I answered that specifically, but that's kind of like what we've looked at from like a slow growth. Not necessarily slow, it's more intentional and like building
Mm.
what you want along the way and ensuring that like I've just seen stories of entrepreneurs, hey, they build this massive thing and 3 years later walk away from it because they built a monster or like they didn't
Mm,
intend it to build that way. Versus I look at it as how can we build products, services, like anything we offer in a way that's so foundationally sound. And if that means going slower, I'm okay with that because
mhm.
that just means you can go faster if you want to later.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
such a good reminder of it. And yeah, you hear stories about how people have built businesses that are multi six figures in like 2 short years, and yet it's like running their entire life, and it's not how they wanted it, and they're fixing things on the back end and all of these things, and it's almost like you're taking time now to do what you want later. And you mentioned lifestyle. What what are some, like, can you share your own experience of how you're being intentional with making sure that you're building your business to fit your lifestyle? And has that
Totally.
intention from when you started of what your style, what you thought your lifestyle would look like, has that changed at all?
Yeah. Oh my God, that's such a good question. So as you go through entrepreneurship, I mean, if you're not an entrepreneur or a small business owner, I feel like you'll go through this too. But like I said, I feel like it's like a hyper path to like figuring out who you are and what
Yeah.
you want. And I'm like, I've taken every like personality or like test under the sun. I'm an Enneagram 7 and
Mm,
and through that and other modalities, I've really honed in on like freedom is like the number one value I have. And freedom to me means time, location, and money freedom. Like I just
mm,
love freedom. I just if you couldn't tell from jumping from job to job, I just don't like people telling me how and when I can do things. And so knowing that, I've approached it in a way of like, how can I build something that allows me all three of those prongs? And like now team members that also believe in those things.
mm.
So doing that, I've always guided with that. So location freedom, our business is fully remote, which has been beautiful through the pandemic just because we're still in that. I feel like that's uprooted so many businesses, or we've always been, hey, I want anyone that works with us or works in our business that we don't need to have in person. That's an added bonus if we want to.
Mm.
So that's always been priority number one. So that's location, time freedom. My employees work when they want, whenever they want, as long as stuff gets done. I don't care if it's at 11 p.m. I don't care if it's like 4 a.m. You do it whatever you want.
Like whatever floats your boat.
Yes, just because I never loved the you have to be in a chair from 8 to 5. I just don't believe in
Mm.
that philosophy. I don't believe in time. I believe in like what's getting done and how well it's getting done. I don't care how fast or slow you go. So that's kind of like time and location and then money freedom. And this is another proponent of slow growth is every business owner has different views on this, but like when it comes to revenue and profit, I care a heck about profit for a bunch of different reasons. Um,
Sure. Can
and
you share a little bit about that too? Because I think
yeah,
that also is important to acknowledge that making top line revenue of $100,000 is not the same as what you take home, and not the same as
totally.
the profit. And so someone could have a seven figure business, but if the way that they made that revenue is tied up in ad costs, it's like, okay, well, what
Totally.
really is the profit? Like, do you want
Totally.
a profitable, do you want to, not saying that someone who's making a half a million is more profitable than a seven figure, but sometimes you can make more money by which, okay, I'm going to stop talking. Sorry. I just get excited.
No, I nerd out too. Yes. Such good questions. So we do that in our own business and we help even in our accelerator, we help people like our first module is know your numbers of like what's your product lines, what's like cost per sale that we're working towards so you know your margins along the way because it's so important.
Mm,
Not only scaling but also knowing yeah, how much am I spending on so our ad costs go into just like the marketing of like your business, your products, right? So we hyper focus on that because we want to look at how much you're taking away and then like obviously when we run ads for clients and or help our accelerator members we don't know your whole business structure but we just want to help you figure out you tell us your number and let's work backwards from like okay cool you want to spend $20 for a sale how is that possible and like what are we
yeah.
going to do about it right um the reason that matters a lot to me though is like I said I just look at entrepreneurship as a vehicle for what you believe in and my husband and I he's in this business now which is really exciting and we've had so many conversations of like what do we want to do with that profit relative to our team and our vision just as humans and so we focus on profit because we actually want to start a ton of nonprofits like later in life which are
Mm,
capital intensive so we're like cool we're starting to build buckets for that again for team we really believe in like bonus structures and just paying people what they're worth and all of that stuff so we care a lot about being able to like compensate humans And then just being entrepreneurs too, we're always looking at how can we either launch new products and or completely separate business ventures that will also like help support our vision too. So that's really why we care about it. It's not just the short game. We're focused on like, hey, what do we want to do in 5, 10, 20, 40
Mm,
years to a support like that number one foundation for me of freedom, but also all of the other values that we have of like I don't know about you, and everyone's views on monies are very differently, but like to me money is just money at this point, and it's more like what are you doing with that money to support the things you believe in, you
mm,
know.
mhm.
If regardless if that's like you as a human like supporting yourself, but also like the people communities that you want to help.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love
See,
that.
tangents.
I know, but these are really great tangents. I feel like I haven't asked you barely any of the questions that I send out in the pre-survey, but this is great. See, it gets us started.
Yeah.
I have two follow-up questions. If you don't mind sharing, like, how
Yeah.
did you in the beginning, right? Money is money at this point, but like money is everything when you don't have it, or there's that quote, right?
1000%.
So when you were getting started, how did you decide like how much to pay yourself and like share as much or as little as you want, but like what was that thought process through your head of knowing how to pay myself? And then did your strategy change in year 2 as you began to make more money, and what did that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So like when I started my business, I've started telling people like I only had $1,000 in my bank account. Like I was just like a young 20 something, right? Where you're like pay bills, things are happening, student loans, right?
Oh
And
god,
that's
yeah.
really when it comes to your risk assessment, like it's totally you. I'm very like, hey, I'm gonna make this work. I believe in it. Like, let's go.
Yep.
So that's where I started. And so 100% today, it's completely different story. But throughout the way, I look at it of reinvesting like profits and money into continual learning. Like I can't tell you the
Mm,
amount of like masterminds I've signed up for, events I've gone to, like all of those things that like I don't know who said it. I'm the worst at crediting people, so someone else told me this, but that the thing that's going to make you the most money in your life is you and your brain, not your actual business or not your properties. It's like how you think and the things that you're exposed to throughout the way,
mm,
which I've found to be the truest thing in the entire world. So years 0 through 2, honestly, was continuous reinvestment in like learning, exposure, getting in groups, getting in mastermind, paying to be there. Because just being exposed to people that either thought like me or was ahead of me was so eye-opening, and not only eye-opening but like reaffirming too, because
mm.
I think this space is, I don't like the word lonely, but it can be upfront where you're like, I'm talking about all these things and like friends and family that aren't there don't get it. And like I remember
Mhm.
my husband the first year, he's like, I think you just invested an MBA worth of like dollars into
Yes.
like community and masterminds. And I'm like, I know, because I applied to MBA school while I was in jobs, and I was like, why am I doing this? Like it's not what I
Wow.
want. This like that's not the trajectory. And it's funny because I think when I said that to him, he like was like, I can't believe you just spent that much money. And I'm like, I know, but it's worth it.
Mm,
And you just got to hold strong in that vision. Um, so I think it's just a like from my perspective, reinvesting profits and reinvesting money in learning. And honestly, I've always been kind of like a minimalist, but I go, hey, I'd rather live like lower now so that like you can do the things, whether it's for yourself or ownership or giving back in the future. Like I'd
mm.
rather go that approach now so that you can do all the things you want to later, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely too. And I always recommend it. It also takes a hard look at your personal spending and how much do you actually
Totally.
really need to live, and go about it that route. And mine was, so when I in 2012, when I quit my corporate job, I became like a full-time subcontractor. So some months money was plentiful and fruitful and so many projects. And the next month it wasn't as much. And I, at 24, I didn't know how to like manage and make it consistent. And I quickly learned a year in that I was
Totally.
like, oh, there has to be some sort of system to help make it so that even though one month is really high and the next month maybe isn't as much revenue, how do I create consistency for me? And then it was like, okay, how much do I actually need to pay
Yep.
myself and live off of for rent, health insurance, student loans, and all of that? And then say, okay, cool. I'm going to move that money every month and I'm going to leave the rest in the account so that I can create a 3 to 4 month runway in the event that something doesn't happen. So yeah, and but like today it's very different than, and I love like profit first method, which was really helpful by Mike McAllowitz. I know some people they do theirs very simplicity. They've got their checking account and their business saving account, and like that's it, and that works for them. So I think it just goes back to, figuring out what works best for, you and an individual.
Totally.
Anything else you wanted to add on that?
I don't think so. I think it's such a personal journey, right? Like I know you're this way. I'm hyper into personal finance too. I recommend that
Mm,
as a route, even if you don't like. I could like when I started a business, didn't know a thing about it, to be completely frank.
yeah.
And now I think I've read every personal finance book on the planet, mainly because when you know those things, it's just so empowering, right? To like
Mm.
know your numbers, even if you're a person that like doesn't love looking at it or is like, I love sales and marketing, so I'm always focused on that. And so,
You're like, how do I just get the money in?
yes,
You're like,
yes,
someone else count it. But
yes.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and just studying people that like pick the business owners you like love and admire and looking at, okay, cool, how do I think they're managing their finances or like what's their approach or how do they talk about money and starting to watch that is just
Mm,
I've learned so much from reading and learning just in like studying people. Yeah,
yeah. And going back to what you're saying about how it's just this personal development journey, I feel like it also, one of the big sub buckets or categories of the personal journey is taking a really close look, like not just necessarily the numbers, like that's important, but from my experience, I had to work through some of my relationship with money, and looking at, okay, the environment that I grew up in, money doesn't
totally.
grow on trees, and rich people are X, Y, and Z, and kind of debunking a lot of those beliefs. Because I had this, even when I got my first job out of college, it was like a really decent paying salary job. And yet I still found myself paycheck to paycheck. And after going through so much work and still continuing to do work, there was this moment of, I actually didn't think that I was enough. And so anything that was coming to me in terms of finance or just anything, right? Like it was never going to be enough. And until it was learning that that was a subconscious narrative that was always driving the money, and thinking like, okay, well, I made X amount of money, but that's just not enough.
Totally.
Like it's never going to be enough. And so it was learning to say, like, how do I think differently? I mean, that took 3 to 4 years investing in courses, again, investing in masterminds and courses. And like there are times
Yeah.
where I'm like, this isn't working. And it's like, okay, well, now there's another thought process that I need to work on. But I mean, it just
Yeah.
goes to show that's just a continual journey of learning. And I think to offer up to anyone who's tuning in and listening is that, like, things are working. Even if we don't physically
Totally.
see it, it's trusting and knowing that things are happening. And you may not recognize it in the moment, but there will be a future moment where you're like, oh my gosh, it just clicked, right? And
Yeah.
yeah,
And
I'm
to add
curious, like,
on
did
to
you
that,
have, yeah,
well, I was
what
just gonna
was,
add on to that, like, I think, for me, I've never been a I don't know. I've never really cared, at least I didn't think I thought I cared about what people thought, just being someone that's like, I don't know, I'm just gonna do things my own way. But I think when you make the leap and people's perception of success, it has changed a lot, to be frank. I think entrepreneurship is like really sexy right now.
mm,
Good or bad. There's actually, I used to think everyone should be an entrepreneur, and now I'm like, hey, really know yourself before you like
yeah.
dive in, right? But my point being is when I first started my business, I joke, but like people's perception of success or thinking or me perceiving or like, projecting, do other people think I'm successful? Right. Because
Mm,
when pre-pandemic, when we weren't all home, I was like walking my dog at 10, right? And I was like, people probably think I'm just, I don't even know, like whatever, right? Like, does this
right.
have a job is kind of like what I think people like thought, right? And so just being okay with, hey, they think whatever about me, but they don't
Mm,
know what's actually behind the scenes, right? So starting to be okay with what are people's perceptions. And I always joke with my husband because not that it's bad, I'm just not a super like material person. So like I typically don't buy like super high end brand name things and things like that just because I don't find value there. I would rather splurge on like travel. That's like
yeah.
my thing. Um, but the whole joke I put is like there's tech billionaires that like literally walk around in the same sweatshirt like 7 days in a row, but they're
Mm,
super successful. And we only know that because we know what they run. But like starting to get okay with people's other ideas, projections of what success looks like doesn't have to be true for you. Like you just have to be okay
mm,
with, do I know like what I want my values are and am I working towards those regardless of like does society expect X to look like success or like whatever success looks like for you. you know?
Oh yeah. Oh my
We
God.
do
I
all
feel like
that
we could
lovely stuff.
I feel like we could do a part 2 of this, but that is so true because it's almost this again, like part of the personal development is transcend, I think, kind of moving through your ego always wants to be right. And your ego wants to know that it's in charge and it
Yep,
wants to know that things are going to be okay. And it wants to know that we're important. And it's being okay with someone, or even if someone doesn't understand what it is that you do, or like,
totally.
what's your business? I'm an online accountability coach for women who want to like start their business and just begin, starting. And you get the looks, it's like, what? And again, our
Mhm.
brains maybe aren't as wired to fully understand that. Whereas if you say you're a lawyer or you're an accountant, it's much easier for that brain.
Totally.
But there's that moment where it's an opportunity for us that you could even take that. Like as soon as we're like, oh, it's uncomfortable, or, no one understands what I do. It's kind of like, okay, but does it really, I mean, it matters in the sense when you're marketing your things, but like
Totally.
taking a pause and going, what am I feeling right now? And why do I feel this way? And why is it
Yes.
important for me to have them know exactly what like it kind of, it's
Totally.
like a total observation experiment where it's like, whoa, wait a second.
Totally. Yeah.
it's,
Yeah. And just
it's
being okay with like whatever they think is like their own thoughts, right?
what
It
they
has no
think.
reflection on what's actually like true for you. Totally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And to kind of go back to, you had said location, time, and money freedom. And then saying that it all comes back to what's our definition of success. Because if we're not careful, we could be building and climbing a ladder that is not going to any place near where we ultimately want to do. And so, like, if you want a certain lifestyle long term, it's like maybe like doing all the things now to kind of feed into that. What does your daily and weekly schedule look like? Give us a little behind the
Yeah.
scenes and,
Yeah.
share with us.
So it's funny. I have no scheduled day to day. I have buckets, but one of my favorite things, and this is just a flow of like getting to know yourself. Um, I wake up every day and I just know the things I want to get done that day, but I can start work at 7 or 6 a.m. if I'm like, I just wake up and I'm like inspired and this is what I'm gonna do. Some days I don't start till 9 or 10 because I'm like, that feels good to me. So like
Mm,
being able to have that space and freedom of what kind of ramp up time and where's my brain at in the day. Um, Especially from the health side, I've done a lot of like health research in last, and like women operate different than men, just like
mm,
as like our bodies. And
yep.
so even not to go down that rabbit hole, but just honoring like where you're at in a given day or month too, it's just super freedom to start and end your day when you want. Cause again, I believe in like what's your goals and visions for that day, week, or month. And like you don't have to put X amount of time at any point to do that, right? Like, so
Mm,
it's some days I work. We personally love to work like a Monday through Thursday with like a Friday off situation just because that feels good to us.
yep.
But then there's some weeks I'll show up on a Saturday and work all day because I'm just super inspired and that's what feels good to me. So, flexible schedule, like I said, is really big for us from
Yeah.
what we do. Like, we have KPIs on a 90-day basis of like, here's our ultimate goals that we're working towards. And as long as we're making progress, regardless if you want to show up more or less, like that's
Mm,
what we're working towards because it feels good.
yeah. Well, and it goes back to what you're saying earlier is that so much of we're programmed in our economy that the more time you spend, the more
Totally.
valuable the result is. And really it just comes down to like the goal, like just get the result, regardless of how much time or energy it took. Like
Yeah.
just let's focus on reaching the result. And it's also, if we don't have those measures or what success looks like or result, you never know if you actually hit it. So you never know when to stop
Yes.
or when it's okay
Yeah.
to let go.
And like you're talking about hobbies, I started giggling because I started out like you of like, no, my like fun time is building business, right? And I love it and it's fun. But now I got really into gardening last year during the pandemic and it's like this happy place for me.
Yeah.
But the funny part is like that's where I'm like, I don't start till 10. Like in the summer, if I'm out gardening for an hour, sometimes I have the best ideas not working, right? And so
Mm,
like there's freedom and like amazing things that could come out of your space. Like I don't think I did a good enough job honoring spaciousness the first few years. And now I'm like, oh, there's so many good aha moments that come from when you're not in front of your laptop or at your
mm,
desk. You know what I mean? Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
It's like, was it Elizabeth Gilbert? in her one book about the ideas and that they
Big
find you,
magic.
big magic, and it's
Yes.
important to have that space so that they can like find you, because otherwise if it's like go go go, but at the same time there's probably seasons for hard work to
Totally.
say, right? Like um it's so interesting, so fascinating.
I just went on this like Instagram post I wrote about it. My husband and I just got off a 7-week road trip through the
Yeah.
South. And so that we put our hours down and then we're like, okay, cool. That was Q1, Q2. We're ramping up our hours because we have so many more initiatives that like we came up with during Q1 that we're like, cool, we're back in the saddle. Like this is our
That's
phase of like
awesome.
working harder. And so that's where it's more like cyclical and riding waves as they come. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
I
when people
love
ask like
that.
what's your like, like schedule? I'm like, honestly, it's kind of made up on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis of like what phase are we in? Are we growth? Are we like, yeah, there's just so much to it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love that you share that too. I mean, some people operate with like a very diligent schedule, and some people you're saying, this is just how I operate, and you're owning that. And I think
Yeah.
that is key. Um, okay, so I have a few questions as we kind of wrap up.
Yeah.
What are the like three actionable things you recommend for new business owners to start doing when they're getting started?
Oh gosh. First couple things, I would say this is not to be like esoteric, but get to know yourself and get okay with that. Like
Mhm.
putting a ton of time into personal development and just like honing in on the foundation of you is going to be so powerful. Um yeah, the healthiest entrepreneurs I know are and with the best visions are the ones that really truly know themselves as humans. So actionable things, honestly, I would start to really pay attention to like how do I perform best? Like when do I show up best? What are the things that light me up? Like paying attention and not just in a, oh, I'm good at this, but really figuring out like what do I do? And then right after I finish that action, like I'm on a high on life, like just
Mm.
naturally, right? Like for example, I love sales calls, I love Zoom calls. I'm an ENFJ, so like I told you, take tests. They're not just like random internet like personality tests. Pay attention to the threads that you see throughout them and say, I've
Mm.
seen this pattern because I like this podcast. I love talking to people and I light up communicating with people. I'm like a
Mm.
verbal communicator, which I didn't know until like I started to notice those patterns. So I would say like really know yourself, figure out the patterns of like what makes you happy, lights you up, because I think those are the best paths forward for yourself.
Mhm.
um as a new person too, I always joke, but I think I got an MBA like through Barnes and Noble. Like I read so many books like 0 to 2. I don't read as much anymore because I feel like there's a phase where you've learned so much in tactics that you're just kind
Mm.
of more of a I looking for foundations to just go off of now. But
Mhm.
those first few years, honestly, I think I read, if you name a business book, I probably have read it. There's just
Which
20.
one's your favorite one? Or one that you were like, this was super impactful that you really enjoyed?
You know, from a, I don't know, you've probably read this, the War of Art by Stephen
Yes.
Pressfield, Capital
Yeah.
R Resistance. That
Yeah.
I loved so much because as a freedom person, sometimes working through resistance is like a practice. So
Mm.
that one from more of like a approach philosophy, like foundation of how to think and approach work. It was really beautiful. Um, trying to think from like there's so many, right? There's so many good nuggets from. Um, yeah, I'm looking back at my shelf. Um, Psycho Cybernetics is really really good. Which is such a like it's such a it sounds like a science book, right? Um, that one was a beautiful book on how your brain thinks as a human and like how to start
Oh.
to like just figure out how do I think, why do I think certain like just like biological trigger points.
Mm.
um, and then there's this really good one. Um, oh yeah, Never Split the Difference. Have you ever
Oh, yeah, he went to Iowa State. I'm
he, like
actually
the FBI
looking. Yeah,
negotiator?
Chris
Yeah.
Voss, because he was
Yes.
I have that book on my shelf too.
Yes.
He was like former FBI negotiator.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny because like you, like I love sales, and so just it's funny because once you figure out words of things you're already naturally doing, like mirroring, I was like, oh,
Mm.
don't even teach this, right? But it's really simple concept of just mirroring back what the person's giving you as like affirmation. So
Yes.
I always just say like pick up books of like what you're not that great at or you want to get better at and just read
Mhm.
from experts. And, like to me, when you first get started, it's just a time investment. And then when you run out of time, then you're looking at like how can I make progress faster by not sitting and reading a book all the time, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Well, because I think to your what you're saying too is that I found like in the beginning I was listening to all the podcasts, reading all the books, and now people are like, "What's on your podcast?" And I'm like, two life coaching podcasts and an astrology podcast. That's
yes,
it. Like that
yes,
is it because I'm like, I already know what I need to do in terms of tactics. And now I
yes,
just want to go deeper with the mastery and test it and like
yes.
limit the input so that I'm not being distracted by all the other things that I could possibly be doing.
1,000%.
Yeah.
I identify with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the third thing I would say is honestly, like, make friends, make connections. I joke, my husband who's recently not in a corporate job now, like I call them my internet friends. We're like we've never met in person, but we'll Zoom all the time, like just catch up, like help each other, right? And it's funny because some of those relationships are deeper than like in person, like local friendships,
Mm.
just because you're on the same path. And so I would say the more people that you can get in the same phase of where you're at and slightly before you is just so fulfilling and just really cool, and just eye-opening. I think those connections are really powerful.
I
Yeah.
love that. Thank
Yeah.
you. Yes, this has been amazing. Okay, I have a few rapid fire round questions. What is the best $100 or less purchase someone can make in their business?
Ooh, I think I said for me it's books. Honestly, if you're
Mhm.
first starting, it's 1,000% books because there's like I said, I think it's an MBA in a box. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
so good. Okay, lovely, amazing. What is where do you get your inspiration from?
Ooh, I'm like you now, where I've tried to start limiting the inputs at this point. Inspiration for me is I've actually looked at people not in my space, so I've actually started to look at people of what are people in things that I just find interesting as hobbies doing, and how are they
Mm,
operating? Because I find so much inspiration of like, yeah, how other people not in my like genre are doing things to keep thinking differently, right? Yeah.
mhm. I love that. That's such a great idea. What I've never asked this question before, and I don't believe that there's any failures or like
Oh,
any regrets,
I feel excited
but
now.
yeah, you don't know that this question's coming. This is what happens when you have a framework or you have a script, but sometimes you just need to go with the flow. What
Yeah.
is something that like you can remember back in your business that was an OSM, so oh shoot moment, where if you could have done something differently, you would? Now, I prefaced saying that like there's that line of okay, I wouldn't change anything because otherwise I wouldn't be where I am here today, but if you could do
Totally.
something different because of
Yes.
a lesson you learned and it could have been quote unquote avoided, what might you offer sort of as that advice piece?
1,000%. There was a phase in my business that is such a good question because I agree, right? It all leads you to like where you're at. So it's really hard to like butterfly effect it out. But
Yeah.
um I would say there was a phase where I didn't know my true alignment yet of like how do I operate and like who am I at my core, that I think for a while I invested and listened to people that operated their lives and just marketing how they talked about business in a
Mm,
way that does not feel true today, and delayed me getting to where I am now. And delay's not always a bad thing, right? But more of um I don't really identify with uh like income or goals in the way of like, hey, you can achieve X from like an outward perspective. I go more
mm,
from like what is the things that we can build to affect people in the way we want, not necessarily monetarily. I
mhm,
feel like in business a lot of people can preach, hey, make X by like within 12 months or whatever you're talking
mm,
about, right?
mhm,
And now I really operate in I only want to learn from people that are in true alignment with my values. And I think
mm,
a failure in my perspective is sometimes if you don't keep coming back to your why and the inputs are the wrong inputs, you can go
mhm.
down a path and then you have to actually go backwards to go forwards again.
Yeah.
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 So that's where I'm always like, get to know yourself and your alignment because like hopefully you can stay on paths you don't have to go so far off course with. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
No, that is
Yeah.
such a beautiful story too. And I think like I can hear the thoughts of some of the listeners thinking like, here's what I don't want someone listening to this podcast doing. Like, don't be afraid don't be afraid to potentially find yourself down a path and then realize that you're not in alignment with that path,
Totally.
right? Because maybe it's if you don't get started today, you're not going to know that it's not in alignment. And so rather than trying to think your way through it to figure it out, like just do it. I think it was I've talked about this before in the podcast of during World War II, over in England. Oh my gosh, why is that the guy's name escaping me? Anyway, but it was basically there was a decision about like they had option A and option B and they didn't know which one. And in that moment, he just made a really quick decision because he's like, well, I think it's option A.
I've got
If
two
it's not
choices.
right, I'm going to know, right? You know
Yeah.
sooner. So it's not this delayed of like mulling back and forth, like making the decisions quicker.
Yeah.
Because the quicker you make the decision, the quicker you know whether or not, and then take that action. So amazing. Okay, this has been so incredible. High vibe. Loved our conversation. Where can my listeners learn more about you, connect with you, and just kind of eat up everything that you offer and have
Yeah.
like
So you
knowledge?
can learn more about like hanging out with me, learning with me at jennysingh.com, or have them at Hello as our foundation of like our thoughts, beliefs, everything that we've built, either option. And then the place I hang out the most on the internet is Instagram. I love it because I feel like it's the most depth. So any of those places, I would love to like hang out, geek out, and get to know you.
Oh
So
my gosh,
this
so
has been awesome.
amazing. Yay. Thank you so much,
Cool.
Jenny. It's been a blast.
Thanks, Amanda. See you later.
If you enjoyed today's podcast episode, you can head on over to shediditherway.com where you can access the entire vault of She Did It Her Way podcast episodes. And you can also access free trainings and resources all about how to make the ultimate leap from your 9 to 5. And if you enjoyed today's podcast episode, I would be so grateful if you headed on over to iTunes and left a review letting me know what you love about the She Did It Her Way podcast. Until next time, keep doing it your way.